Torid S tier. I mean, to not call this one the most broken weapon in the game would be doing it a disservice. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Let's be honest. Torid, that's it. Do I need to say more? For those who don't know, I guess I have to say a bit more. You blow your load on enemies, and it charges your incarnate, meaning you don't need to headshot. Come real close. You don't need to headshot to get your incarnate.
Starting off with, actually probably the Torid should be S+. I think that the Torid incarnate is the best incarnate and maybe the single best primary weapon in the game. The Torid is nuts. The Torid is eliminating zip codes from this world, and it is so easy to charge. You don't have to get headshots with this incarnate, you just have to hit things directly, and it charges so extremely fast. And when you evolve it, the ammo lasts ages, and it just vaporizes anything you look at.
But what if there was a gun that could rival the Torid in terms of damage? Tenet Glaxion is one of our strongest weapons, rivaling the Torid in terms of room clearing without being an incarnate. Since it's a sister of Parvo's weapon with innate cold, it is very interesting in how you can build it compared to every other weapon in the game. It is a beam weapon with high base damage, high status and medium crit stats. It has an innate mechanic similar to the Kuva Nuker that lets itself chain to 3 more enemies. Every chained enemy takes 50% less damage, however this mechanic is easily breakable by adding punch through. Punch through will let you hit more enemies with the initial beam, which in turn will chain to even more enemies. Even better, every enemy hit by the initial beam abusing punch through does not take less damage, and they can also chain to the same enemy from hitting different enemies with punch through. Punch through also allows you to chain the initial beam to other enemies through walls, which is extremely broken. All this make Prime Shred an incredible mod for this weapon, breaking its AoE capabilities completely and making it amongst the strongest beam AoEs in the game. For the Progenitor, we will see mainly magnetic builds, but with the Riven mod you can go for a heat Progenitor, which greatly increases the damage of this weapon, and we will get to that at the end of the video. For now, let's take a look at all our magnetic Tenet Glaxion builds, starting off with a maximum damage no DOT build. The build of course consists of Prime Shred, which we mentioned at the start of the video, Stonebringer and Malignant Force for extra corrosive damage, Magnetic from the initial damage from the Progenitor, and Cold also from the initial damage because this weapon is innate cold. We increase the damage even further by adding Serration and Galvanized Aptitude for extra direct damage on the status since this weapon is additive CO, and then we add Primary Frostbite for that extra critical damage and multi-shot. Dual Galvanized modes for more status chance and multi-shot through Aptitude and Chamber obviously, and then crits with Vital Sense and Critical Delay. This build is by far the best if you're trying to clear hordes of enemies on base Still Path. After the first kill, enemies simply jump like flies, and no matter what Warframe you use, you will never have issues killing any enemies in base Still Path. Get a Chroma with Nourish and you can really push the build to its limit. The extra Viral from Nourish gives us the ability to do 4 different elements and way more damage to health, and Chroma's Vex armor can increase the base damage of this weapon by a ton. This means you can even chain Serration on the build to Hammer Shot and get even stronger if you run the setup. The only downside to this weapon in general is that since it's a beam, it struggles with killing acolytes, so you're better off using a melee weapon to do that. For our second build, we're gonna be taking a look at the primer build. For this build, you can completely ignore any type of base damage and just focus on dealing as many status as possible for as long as possible onto the enemies. We can start off with the good old Prime Shred because we do want that AoE still, because this weapon does do AoE priming very easily. It is innate cold and magnetic, so we can ignore modding for these, but we need to go for radiated reload to get radiation damage, and then high voltage and malignant force for extra corrosive damage. This means now we can add straight up status modes with hammer shot and rifle aptitude, and then we have Severing Contagion, which is a really strong mod for this weapon and for a primer for this weapon, because this allows us to spread status effects even more, specifically the cold status, which allows every enemy to be frozen. Frozen enemies take plus 1.0 critical damage, and then it just gets ridiculous with the extra CC. If that's not enough, we have Continuous Misery to keep those enemies frozen, and then Primary Obstruct is here because the jamming weapons effect counts towards condition overload. So it gives us for our secondary weapons plus 120% damage, and for our melee weapons plus 80% damage whenever this procs. It is really strong on this type of build. This build crowd controls and primes at the same time. For normal missions, you can bring a Panzerwolf with you to get some viral procs onto the enemy as well, or simply mod your other weapons for viral, and then for the disruption missions you can bring an extra Vast Lock with gas and electricity, as well as the IPS damage types. This would allow for complete armor strip and way more status effects onto the disruption target, allowing for potential one-taps. Don't forget, Nourish is one of the most popular abilities in the game, and it also adds viral to your weapon, so it would make this an even stronger primer with that ability. Our third and final build for our magnetic Tenet Glaxion is going to be a DOT build. For the DOT build, we want the least amount of viral damage as possible without ruining the status chance of the weapon. So we're using a rank 0 Malignant Force, and ideally we would use a rank 0 Rhyme rounds, but a rank 3 will do the job just fine. Then the double galvanized setup of galvanized aptitude and galvanized chamber, obviously, hammer shot and critical delay for extra crits, and then hellfire and rifle elementalist for that sweet heat proc damage that will help a lot on this build. Sinister reach is for extra beam length. I missed it on the other builds, but it's not that important, this is just preference. And then primary deadhead is simply preference. You can use either primary deadhead or primary dexterity on this build, depending on how high of a level you go. If you go more than 4-digit level, then you should probably use dexterity, as deadhead will be too hard to stack at those high levels. This build excels at killing disruption targets. It's heavily optimized to do as much single target damage as possible. A primer will help this go a long way, but even without one, it is still a very strong choice to bring to a disruption mission. Now we can take a look at the Heat Glaxion. Normally a Heat Glaxion would give you Blast because it combines with its innate cold. However, a Riven mode can save you and make this weapon extremely broken. Take a Riven mode at rank 0 and try to find an elemental damage on it. Preferably the combination of cold and toxin for viral, like I have here. This will give you an extremely low viral weighting, and the Heat Progenitor will help you boost the heat proc percentage that much higher. With this and our one and only build, you can get the best possible build for this weapon, which is the optimized damage over time build. For the optimized build, you want to put the Riven mod on the top left of the build because this is the first spot and it will let your Riven mod combine first before any other element that goes into the build. This is a Heat Progenitor, as we said, and then we combine it with Hellfire, Thermite rounds, and Wildfire. After extensive testing, I found out that this was in fact the best setup for this weapon. Just go pure hit and you would get the most damage. Rifle Elementalist for even more status damage from those heat procs, and then dual galvanized setup with chamber for multi-shot and aptitude for extra status damage and direct damage per status type. Prime Shred is last for the synergy we talked at the start of the video to get more AoE onto the build, because this build does everything. It does AoE, it does single target damage, it is straight up bonkers. This is the build that makes the Tenet Glaxion a status version of the Torid. The setup with this Riven pushes your heat procs and your damage over the roof, creating what is one of the strongest beam weapons in the entire game. You can use this for disruption, you can use this for exterminate, you can use this for survival. No matter where you may take the Tenet Glaxion, it will just melt anything and anyone, all the way up to even level cap. The heat procs go up so fast because of the weighting, and enemies simply pop out of existence from the heat proc. There is nothing like watching your freeze beam spew out what is basically lava on anyone that it touches, filling them with 100 heat procs every second. It is insane. thank you for watching. I hope you learned something that you didn't know, and that of course you give this weapon a try. Please leave a like and subscribe. It helps my channel a lot and the support lately has been crazy, so thank you very much for that from the bottom of my heart. Be sure to not miss out on the next gun on the list, which is going to be the Tenet Glaxion. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next video.